Hello to everyone in YouTube world. Hope you're doing well. We are still taking a look at sin on this channel, what religious people say about it, and why they talk about it so much. I thought today we would go back to the source of the concept of sin, Judaism. I don't focus on Judaism a lot here because, frankly, I don't perceive that Jews are trying to make laws to make me adhere to Judaism. Some of the conservative Jewish YouTubers really stress that they are backing Judeo-Christian values, hitching their horse to the bigger wagon in hopes of reaping those great benefits. You know, the likes of Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro, who are involved in a broader conservative fight and get money from Christians, in any case. But Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism, and it provided the notions of sin, sacrifice, redemption, etc. So let's go see what their concept is. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I am an atheist and a skeptic, and I am really interested in pushing back against bad ideas, like the concept of sin. Around the time of the high holidays, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, Jewish websites often have some inspirational posts, since this is the time for them of atonement. In fact, that's what Yom Kippur is. It's the Day of Atonement. It is a time to make right what you've done wrong, try to apologize for bad things, etc., etc. Always falls in fall due to the lunisolar calendar that the Jews have adopted. So it's a lunar calendar that is adjusted for the solar year. In any case, this is the time that people start to think about sin in Judaism, and I thought we would look at one post. The website itself is called Reconstructing Judaism, Deeply Rooted, Boldly Relevant. Very nice looking little logo they have, very simple. And today we're looking at this post from August of 2016, around the high holidays, Sin and Forgiveness. So let's go see what this article posits. So it says, Jewish tradition does not understand human imperfections as being the result of an original sin by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Well, we're going to see that that's not quite true. That is one conception. But anyway, sin is the result of our negative human tendencies or inclinations, known in Hebrew as the Yetzer Hara, the inclination toward evil, which must be channeled in ways that affirm life by the influence of the Yetzer Hatov, the inclination to goodness. So we can see that in Judaism, there are these concepts that people are inclined toward good or toward evil, and we have to channel the good parts of ourselves, and therefore we need, we might call it a practice. And so this is where the 613 mitzvot come into play, the practice to incline you toward goodness. Without that practice, we would be inclined toward evil. Now, setting aside whether there is such a thing as good or evil, this insight into how human beings work, I think, is actually not that bad, that we can tend toward laziness or harming ourselves or not doing the things that are better for us. We do the things that are easier for us instead of the harder things. And so we should have a practice towards a disciplined way of being, towards something that gets us to be better and to improve ourselves. So you take that notion, that's the way I'm going to interpret this. Are you on a path that is good for you or a path that's bad for you? Now, I don't believe in good or evil as these forces that are just out there in the world, like Platonic forms reified or something like that. To me, evil is the result of choices and actions that you've made that have harmed somebody, and that somebody could even be yourself. And goodness is making decisions and choices, actions that embody well-being and help people out. This is as simple as it can be. But for these religious types, evil and good are actual things that, things that actually exist. Okay, so they're taking this particular insight into the way human beings work and saying, we have this, and so now what do we need? We need God to set us up, to tell us how to live, so that we are inclined toward the good. So this word sin, in the next phrasing, the word in Hebrew for sin, chet, literally means something that goes astray, like an arrow that misses a mark. So, and you'll hear Christians talk about that too, a sin as missing the mark. And the Greeks had a concept of this called hamartia, and it's part of the basis of Greek tragedy, that the Greeks missed the mark and did something wrong, and so they're going to be punished for it. But in here, it's sin is going astray. And we're going to see that this, again, is not the only conception of sin, but this is one that's very common, just missing the mark. You're not living up towards what God wants you to do, and therefore you're inclined toward evil and not good, basically. Let's move on. This story that they move on to, the story of Noah and the flood, is something that I find interesting. So it says, it teaches that human beings are imperfect, even permanently flawed. All right, so God chose to make us this way, by the way. So God is the one in the Hebrew Bible that has decided how humans are going to be. So the writer goes on, the Torah imagines that upon reflection, God realizes that to destroy the world every time there is corruption and lawlessness would be an endless exercise. Human beings are flawed from the time of our youth, from our encounters with the world, etc. So this is what I find interesting, is that it takes God destroying the world to realize, upon reflection, that human beings are imperfect, that we are flawed. Why didn't he just make everything perfect? Or why didn't he have a real do-over and make it right? So this God, first of all, is not all-knowing. And second, is not all-powerful. This is just a very, very powerful being who is capable of creating the world and destroying the world, but not really doing a good job with any of it. So I find that very interesting. This particular passage goes on, Jewish tradition does not expect us to be perfect, although we are always responsible for our actions. So this is this emphasis on the fact that we are imperfect. We're not expected to be perfect, but we're expected to make good on our bad actions and atone for our sins and everything like that. But it skirts the whole notion that this is what God created. This is what God did. This is what God chose. Or maybe God's just not capable of doing any better. Maybe God himself is an imperfect being. And in this way, he's kind of like those Greek gods, that have all the same foibles as humans. They're jealous, they're angry, whatever, And, in a lot of ways, I think the Jewish God is like those classical Greek and Roman deities, just like the classical world deities. All right, let's go on. This blog goes on to talk about repentance and forgiveness, and it reminds us of the time the Jewish people made a molten calf. This is in Exodus. And this writer says, God of Israel as a forgiving, compassionate, and even merciful God, in addition to being a God of justice and law. And I find this laughable because, once again, this sort of skirts the being of God. So forgiving, compassionate, even merciful. This is a God that drowned the earth, that destroyed the Tower of Babel, that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, that turned a woman into a pillar of salt for turning around, that zapped a person for touching the Ark of the Covenant. I don't see forgiving, compassionate, even merciful in a lot of these stories. But hey, after the making of this golden calf, God forgave them, so even, I guess. Now, as I said, not all of the Jews agree on everything. This is like any religion. You get one idea and two people have 5 different ideas about whatever it's supposed to mean, a different interpretation. So I went and also looked at this Jewish encyclopedia, which is the unedited full text of the 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia by these two gentlemen. We're going to look at a couple of concepts that this page presents. So its definition of sin is, under the Jewish theocracy, willful disregard of the positive or willful infraction of the negative commands of God as proclaimed by Moses and interpreted by the rabbis. That's what sin is. So it has to be, you have to believe in God, you have to think that what God said is the law, and sin is therefore that. That's all sin is. It's not even good or bad action. It is whatever God has said, that you have to obey that. And if you don't, you're a sinner. Simple as that. In this particular entry, we actually get different kinds of sin. So there is this het or hataha or hatat, fault, shortcoming, misstep, which is an infraction of a command committed in ignorance of the existence of meaning of that command. So that is this missing the mark. But then there's the second kind, which is awan, a breach of a minor commandment committed with a full knowledge of the existence and nature of that commandment. And then the gravest kind is the pesha or mered, a presumptuous and rebellious act against God, or a resha, such an act committed with a wicked intention. So we can see here that in different parts of Judaism, the notion of sin is actually divided out, and this gentler missing of the mark is not the only game in town. So there are other kinds of sin. So, just like with Christianity, there are all kinds of thinkers of Judaism that interpret these things differently. So here we go. Different kinds of sin, different levels of sin, depending. And while we're on the topic of different levels of sin, this particular encyclopedia entry deals with original sin. And this is what this particular entry says. So first, man is responsible for sin because he is endowed with free will. We always hear so much about free will. So God created our natures, but also created us with free will. So he created us with these natures that have a tendency to do what he doesn't want. And then we get to say like, oh, but that's just your free will, because you could also develop this other tendency, I guess. But it seems like the stronger tendency is this one toward evil, the one toward laziness or not doing what's in our interest. But anyway, and this goes on to say that we're frail, etc., etc. But about original sin itself, it says Jewish theologians are divided in regard to the cause of this so-called original sin. Some teach that it was due to Adam's yielding to temptation in eating of the forbidden fruit and has been inherited by his descendants. The majority, however, do not hold Adam responsible for the sins of mankind. So anyway, again, like all religions, it's divided. Is this original sin? Is it not? We don't even know. And, still do not have a God coming down to clarify any of all of this. And by the way, since we're on this topic, in case you didn't know, there is a big tradition in Judaism of rabbinical interpretation of texts. So there is the law, the Torah, the law that Moses supposedly gave. Of course, there's no evidence for Moses, but there we are. There's this law, and it needs interpretation. And it is the rabbis who spend their life studying it and giving interpretations. And subsequent rabbis are supposed to look at the studies, the comments of the former rabbis and make their own commentary. So you don't take the Bible just in and of itself. You take into consideration this whole tradition of commentary. So this is a little bit different from Protestantism, and even to a certain extent Catholicism. I mean, there are great thinkers, but just go look at any text on Judaism and you'll see rabbis just cited out the wazoo constantly of this one said this and that one said that. So anyway, back to this. We don't know, is that the original sin or not? And, it'd be nice if God came down and go, here is the clarifying thing. But here's one thing I really liked about this particular entry. The next line of this original sin passage says, the Zohar pictures Adam as receiving all the departed souls at his resting place in the cave of Machpelah, and inquiring of each soul the reasons of its presence. Whereupon the soul laments, woe unto me, thou art the cause of my departure from the world. And I just love this image of Adam in a cave. I mean, and then these souls parade in front of him and like, hey, yo, what you doing here? And then the guy's like, well, that's your fault, bruh. I think this is great. This is like really good mythology, and the world would be a better place if there was more of this kind of commentary. We're not going to read the rest of it, but I just find it interesting. There's no real idea about the notion of original sin and where it came from and why our nature is the way it is. These are all things that could be clarified if, some deity just wanted to show up. Anyway, now I don't want to read all of this. These are very long passages about sin, and I am just pulling out a few notions that are in the texts. But I did want to show this one thing that I thought was kind of funny, which is responsibility for sin, which says the responsibility for sins against Judaism rests forever upon the Jew. Apostasy does not relieve him from responsibility in this respect. And I love apostasy being, you're not Jewish anymore, so presumably you don't believe in this stuff anymore. So who's holding you responsible? I guess in this conception, God is real, and so God is holding you responsible whether you believe in him or not. But I just love this. To me, this is all about humans judging one another. Because so far, we're the only ones that say anything that we can show that there are these beings judging each other, and it is human beings judging each other for what they're doing. So overall, I think in Judaism, we see a more complex image of human nature. It isn't just that humans are sinful, but that they have a tendency toward evil that can be altered and guided toward a better nature. And this situation is why Judaism really is about adherence to the 613 mitzvot, the kosher laws and all that. And while they are bizarre, a couple of themes do emerge where you can see what they were on about back in the day. One theme is purity, no mixing of different fabrics or sowing your fields with different seeds. And then the kosher laws, some of the forbidden food is considered impure, like fish that are bottom feeders living in the murk. Another theme is bodily integrity. So there are laws about when a woman has her flow. And then there are things for how to deal with it. For the impurity, there are rites that the law prescribes, what and how to sacrifice and in what manner and what the blood is supposed to do, etc., etc. Also, Judaism really emphasizes the notion of redemption through prayer, sacrifice, etc. We didn't read these parts, but for sins against other humans, you can't just tell your rabbi and get absolution. Jewish law actually requires you to make amends, to make it right, apologize and all that. I think that's a plus. You can't just go to a priest and say, oh, I did this harm, and then you never apologize to the person or make it right in any way. So that's something that's a bonus here. I think that's a plus. Well, we can see where Christianity gets its idea of sin through this. Christians overall have jettisoned the notion of following specific practices to stay on the right path. Instead, they embrace the notion that we have a sinful nature, and they have postulated that only faith in Jesus can save us, or, in Catholicism, it's the rituals. But I think that what needs to be emphasized more and more is that sin only exists if there is a God that makes it exist. The notion that people stop believing in God because they want to sin is ludicrous in this light. However I want to lead my life, I have to believe God exists and wants certain behaviors for me to want to sin. Otherwise, I'm living my life, I'm either doing good or bad. And saying that I don't believe in sin doesn't mean that I think I'm perfect or that I never do anything wrong or I've got it all figured out or I'm my own God. Humans are imperfect. We make mistakes of all kinds. But frankly, I don't see the guidance of the Jewish law as really helping us do better in life. And I certainly don't see Christianity as a good guide to creating a better world. We are better served by looking to psychology for human well-being and very secular laws to guide us to better behavior. Now, sin is a huge topic, and each of these videos can only talk about so much. The stuff in this video wasn't as batshit as some of the other readings I've done, but I think it is instructive to know the roots of this concept of sin and what each group is doing and how they talk about it. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have something you want to say, if you have a comment on something that you saw in this video or whatever, put it in the comments below, and while you're down there you can like and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff. You're on YouTube, you know what to do. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. Link is in the description below. And that's all I got for you today. I've got a little bit more on sin coming up, and I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.